Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, members of the Council, I am grateful for giving me the floor to examine the report of the Secretary General as well as to consider the renewal of the mandate of MONUSCO. I hail the quality of the report and I pay tribute to the DPPO, to humanitarian actors and all UN personnel who day after day work to protect civilians in conditions of extreme seriousness. We'd like to recall that the very rationale of this organization is to defend human dignity even when in adverse circumstances. I also hail here the presence here and the important contribution of Undersecretary General Mr. Jean Lacroix of Sierra Leone in its capacity as chair of the 1533 committee and the president of Médecins Sans Frontières and the representative of Burundi. Mr. President, on the 4th of December of this year in Washington, Presidents Felix Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame signed an agreement facilitated by the United States under the leadership of President Donald Trump. This agreement, supported by regional guarantors and international ones, brought and continues to bring the hope of a historic turning point. And yet, less than 24 hours after that signature, the facts have refuted the commitments undertaken. There were bombings, explosive drones, coordinated offensives around Uvira and in the Ruzizi plain. It's unacceptable that a solemn agreement should thus be trampled on the very day after it was signed on to. These actions put into question the dynamic created in Washington and confirm what the Secretary General's report underscores. The ceasefire demanded by Resolution 2773 has not been implemented. Attacks against civilians persist. Humanitarian access is hindered, and the situation continues to worsen in spite of diplomatic efforts. Your Excellencies, the Democratic Republic of the Congo voluntarily chose the path of diplomacy. This choice is neither a concession or a sign of weakness. It reflects our control of our sense of responsibility and our faith in multilateral mechanisms, which are, if fully embraced, could still restore peace. We have made this choice because we believe in the commitment of the United States, the main facilitator of the Washington process. We believe in the steadfastness of the state of Qatar, guarantor of the Doha process, and in the value of the Luanda process as a framework. Its principles continue to guide the actions of the African Union, currently led by the Togolese Republic. The DRC has acted in good faith. It continues to act in good faith. Diplomacy for us is not some default setting. It is the very expression of our sense of responsibility as a state and our respect of international law. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, since the 4th of December in the evening, positions around Gatoguta, Ruvungi, Kaziba, Burambo, Luvungi, and along the Kamanyola-Uvira axis have been targeted by shelling coming from the positions of the RDF M23. Kamikaze drones have hit civilian areas. Over 500,000 people have once again been displaced. South Kivu, already in a precarious situation, has reached a breaking point. These facts have been documented by humanitarian mechanisms and confirmed by OCHA. They also create a major risk of regionalization. Shells have already hit Burundi. Uvira is only 30 kilometers from Bujumbura. No neighboring country can be exposed to such attacks without risking escalation. Regional stability cannot rest on the normalization of violations that are as serious as this. Mr. President, less than a week after the signature of the Washington agreements, certain actors have chosen to stray from the commitments freely undertaken. Reversing the narrative and using systematic disinformation to attribute to the Democratic Republic of the Congo the responsibility for attacks committed by the coalition RDF M23 is a well-documented strategy now by international mechanisms. We cannot accept for manipulation to become an instrument of regional policy. Facts are stubborn things. The resolution of the Security Council are even more stubborn. The truth is not negotiable. International law cannot be perverted to legitimize aggression. Observed violations contravene Resolution 2773, contravene the agreement of the 27th of June the agreement signed in Washington on the 4th of December to the Doha Agreement and the very conditions of the implementation of the Regional Economic Integration Framework that was also signed in Washington. Today, it is the very credibility of the entire process and of their guarantors that is at stake.
These members of the Council, we have reached a moment of truth. Either the international order accepts being openly defied, namely by Rwanda, or this Council assumes its responsibility. Impunity has gone on for far too long. The Congolese people cannot continue to bear the cost of commitments that are violated and resolutions that are not implemented. The facts are clear. The ceasefire demanded by Resolution 2773 has not been respected. Foreign forces, namely the RDF, remain on Congolese soil. Civilians continue to be targeted. Humanitarian access is obstructed, and disinformation is being used deliberately to invert responsibilities and shield the perpetrators. The credibility of all processes, Washington, Doha, and the African facilitation depends on one principle: accountability. Without consequences, agreements have no force. Without consequences, the cycle of violence will continue. Resolution 2773 is not lacking in clarity. What is lacking is its enforcement. A resolution that is not enforced does not deter violence, it invites it. When violations carry no cost, impunity becomes policy. The responsibility now before this Council is not to restate its decisions, but to enforce them.
Mr. President, 9 months after the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2773, the conclusion is inexorable. Yet another city has fallen. A parallel administration has been consolidated. Thousands of additional families have taken flight. Others have been killed, raped, terrorized. And even MONUSCO, blue helmets, civilian personnel, leadership, have been targeted. Over the course of these 9 months, this Council has taken no concrete measure to uphold its own resolution and to defend its own mission. Appeals, warnings, but no action. This lack of action has allowed Rwanda to continue and expand its operations in an environment where violations bring about no consequences. The time has come for this Council to confront an essential question. To what extent, in 3 decades of crisis, the absence of coercive measures has contributed to the persistence of these violations? Mr. President, Resolution 2773 remains the lodestar of the UN's involvement. It must be implemented in its entirety without any ambiguity or exceptions. The Democratic Republic of the Congo calls for a robust, coherent mandate adapted to the realities on the ground, one that protects the very authority of this Council. A renewed mandate must guarantee the protection of civilians, reaffirm the withdrawal of foreign forces, support humanitarian operations, explicitly include the protection of blue helmets of civilian personnel and the leadership of MONUSCO, condemn any attacks against them, and prevent any circumvention of the decisions by the Council, because indeed, obstruction of the UN mandate by Rwanda M23 can never justify its weakening. This Council cannot cede in the face of this challenge to its authority. Mr. President, the DRC is an African country, but the DRC is also a fully fledged member of the international community. We respect African solutions to African problems. However, this cannot become a kind of legal relativism, making it possible to circumvent universal norms. There is no regional version of human rights or of sovereignty. Any lasting solution must be based on the universal principles of the United Nations Charter. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, the Congolese people have chosen peace. The people has demanded, negotiated, and signed on to it. It must not pay the price of the bad faith of those who shrug off their commitments. Peace cannot rest on promises not kept. The Congolese people are entitled to security, to justice, and respect for international law. This Council must act so these rights do not remain theoretical, but at last become a reality. This is why the Democratic Republic of the Congo calls this council to fully implement Resolution 2773, to impose targeted sanctions against military and political leaders responsible for the aggression, impose a complete embargo on minerals that are exported and is labeled as Rwandan, revoke the status of troop-contributing country from Rwanda, and establish a systematic notification regime for any transfer of weapons towards Rwanda. The Washington and Doha guarantors, the African facilitators, must also assume their responsibilities. These agreements will only survive on condition of collective steadfastness. It is now up to the international community to uphold the commitments undertaken and pave the way at last for the advent of a lasting peace in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the entire Great Lakes region. Thank you very much.
President Trump was pleased to have convened DRC President Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Kagame in Washington on December 4th for the signing of the Washington Accords and the Regional Economic Integrated Framework. It was a true and sincere demonstration and effort towards peace. However, peace processes require parties to uphold their commitments to that very process. And the United States is profoundly and incredibly disappointed with the renewed outbreak of violence in the eastern DRC. Today, I want to share with you some additional information on the scope and the sophistication of Rwanda's involvement in eastern DRC. Since its reemergence in 2021, Rwanda has had strategic control of its proxy armed group, M23, as well as M23's political wing, the Congo River Alliance, or AFC, and has deployed M23 and the AFC to achieve Rwanda's geopolitical goals in eastern DRC. Kigali has been intimately involved in planning and executing the war in eastern DRC, providing military and political direction to M23 forces and AFC for years now. The Rwandan Defense Forces have provided materiel, logistics, and training support to M23, as well as fighting alongside M23 in DRC with roughly 5,000 to 7,000 troops as of early December. This is not counting the possible increases from Rwanda in this most recent advancement. In more recent months, Rwanda has deployed multiple surface-to-air missiles and other heavy and sophisticated weaponry into North and South Kivu to aid M23 in its conflict against DRC. Rwanda and M23 began their offensive just this last weekend to take Uvira, with Rwandan forces co-located with M23 along the front lines. Additionally, we have credible reports of increased use of suicide drones, increased use of artillery by both M23 and Rwanda, including strikes into Burundi. So rather than a march towards peace, as we saw under President Trump's leadership in recent weeks, Rwanda is leading the region towards increased instability and war. And in light of the commitments made in the Washington Accords, we are deeply concerned that the Rwandan military's continued presence in Congolese territory in support of M23, and we will use the tools at our disposal to hold to account spoilers to peace. We call on Rwanda to uphold its commitments and to further recognize the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo's right to defend its territory and its sovereign right to invite Burundian forces onto its territory. We are engaging with all sides to urge restraint and to avoid further escalation, including refraining from hostile anti-Tutsi rhetoric. As this Council negotiates the MONUSCO mandate, the United States will seek to ensure the mission has the capabilities to provide support to both the Doha and Washington agreements, keeping in mind that the parties themselves bear full responsibility for their successful implementation, and we look for the members of this Council's support as we negotiate this mandate's renewal. MONUSCO's ability to provide critical enabling support to these processes, however, hinges entirely on its ability to move freely, to sustain itself, to implement its mandate without interference. And the fact that UN peacekeeping forces are under siege by forces backed by a member state that itself is a troop contributor to peacekeeping missions, frankly, is a sad hypocrisy. Unfortunately, M23's months-long blockade on MONUSCO has undermined its ability to operate effectively in and out of Goma, as many representatives have stated here today. And for its part, Rwanda continues to deploy surface-to-air missiles and additionally conduct spoofing and jamming operations, which have effectively grounded MONUSCO air operations. So how can MONUSCO succeed under these conditions? We demand the immediate end of such obstruction, which violates M23 and Rwanda's obligations under both the Doha and Washington agreements, respectively. We remain steadfast in our support of MONUSCO and its role in the realization of these historic agreements, which we believe hold great potential to end the decades of suffering in Eastern DRC. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for this. To the representative of Rwanda.
Mr. President, I thank you for giving me the floor, and allow me to begin by commending you for your effective leadership of the Council this month. I also extend Rwanda's appreciation to the Council members concluding their terms. Your service and contributions to the Council's work have been invaluable. I thank USG Rakurwa, Dr. Mohamed Javid, for their briefing and taking note of the Secretary General's report. I also acknowledge the statements made by those who spoke before me. As the Council considers MONUSCO's next mandate, Rwanda expects a mission that is clearly anchored in and reinforcing of the Washington Peace Agreement and the Doha Framework, both of which the Secretary General's report rightly identifies as the central avenues for a sustainable peace. The mandate must therefore prioritize strict impartiality and political neutrality, support to ceasefire implementation and political dialogue, robust human rights due diligence policy compliance, timely suspension and reporting mechanisms where required, refraining from offensive operations against parties formally engaged in political processes, and a realistic resource-conscious focus on stability, accountability, and political solutions. These priorities reflect the realities outlined in the Secretary General's report. MONUSCO's effectiveness will depend on aligning its operations with the political tracks that offer the only viable path forward. The Washington Peace Agreement and the Doha process are complementary, mutually reinforcing frameworks. When the mission supports them consistently and impartially, it can help to create the necessary space for implementation. Rwanda reiterates its full commitment to implement its part of the agreement. We equally believe that the success of the agreement will depend on the political will of both parties. Mr. President, the recent situation in South Kivu has been extensively discussed. And they allow me a moment to also address it. And I will address some of the issues that may logically attract a question. Why am I addressing them? But there is a background to that. In 1994, in this chamber, Ambassador Kovac of Czech Republic, Ambassador Keateng of New Zealand, Ambassador Gambari of Nigeria spoke that Rwandans were being exterminated. That an ethnic group in Rwanda was being exterminated. They had never been to Rwanda, but they discharged their responsibility, confronted denial and silence that was taking place in this chamber to call the genocide for what it was as it was happening in Rwanda. So I am here today and I survive today because those courageous diplomats discharged their duty. I wanted to do it. The situation in South Kivu and the general situation obtaining after the Washington Agreement is a collection of many situations. The ceasefire that was repeatedly broken by the DRC government, that not only broke the ceasefire, but announced they would never stop attacks. Air attacks are offensives too. Even as the diplomatic tracks move forward, the situation on the ground in South Kivu continues to deteriorate in ways this council cannot morally or legally ignore. Over the past year, and in reality since 2017, the Banyamulenge, a Tutsi Kinyarwanda-speaking community of the DRC, have endured a well-documented, systematic, and escalating persecution. I just wanted to address this area alone, among many things that put it together cause the situation we are in. Allow me to highlight just a few incidents which are part of this sustained and systematic campaign of persecution of the Banyamulenge Kinyarwanda-speaking Tutsi ethnic group. Since 2017, more than 85% of Banyamulenge villages in South Kivu were destroyed. An estimated 700,000 cattle, which is their economic lifeline, were raided and killed. On August 25th of 2025, Wazalendo militias and FARDC issued a 10-day ultimatum demanding that all Banyamulenge leave Uvira or be killed. The ultimatum further prohibited them from accessing markets, water points, and other essential means of survival. On the 4th of September 2025, the decision was made to deny the Banyamulenge civilians access to public water points on the grounds that they were enemies. From the 5th to 8th of September 2025, Banyamulenge civilians were abducted and shot, while the mobs chanted for the end of the Banyamulenge. These are early warnings, indicators of atrocity crimes, discrimination, dehumanization, forced displacement, and the denial of basic services. Tens of thousands of Burundian soldiers were deployed into South Kivu on the invitation of the government of the DRC. This is in addition to the presence of FDLR, mercenaries, Wazalendo, and other militias. These troops established coordinated military blockades which exacerbated the situation above. Their operations alongside FARDC, FDLR, and the affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population. And I wanted to highlight here that there are other ethnic groups in that area. There are Babembe, Bafurero. There is another ethnic group that I don't remember. But these conditions I'm describing were imposed only on Banyamulenge Tutsi ethnic group. Banyamulenge, yes. Their operations alongside FARDC and FDLR and affiliated militias imposed a siege on the Banyamulenge population, resulting in nearly a year of the communities in Minembwe Highlands being deprived of food, medicine, and humanitarian access. This situation was exacerbated by the coordinated military blockades. On the 16th to 18th of October 2025, the on-road to the Mitamba market was closed, cutting off food supplies to civilians. On the 6th of September 2025, a group of 80 to 100, between 80 and 100 Banyamulenge civilians, mostly women, returning with food for their starving families, were ambushed by a FARDC Burundian Mai Mai coalition, and reports indicate killings, torture, and sexual violence. Equally well known, but disregarded, is the scale of air attacks carried out by DRC government forces and their allies, which continue to affect civilians already under siege. Among many others are the following. On the 29th of August 2025, and multiple dates, repeated drone strikes hit the outskirts of Banyamulenge IDP camps around Mikenya. On the 27th of September 2025, a Burundian CH-4 drone bombed Nzibira in South Kivu. On the 15th of November 2025, Kinshasa operated drones bombed Mikenya, a village hosting Banyamulenge internally displaced persons. Between March and December this year, there has been 50 air attacks in this area. No one is speaking about this. I will appreciate the situation another day if we can be told this didn't happen. We have raised this, at least I did, with some members of the council, individually. We have raised this in this chamber. Nothing was done. The government of the DRC, as an inviting authority, should be responsible for the action and the conduct on the ground of Burundian forces and their allies. Rwanda has not been silent. I just said this. Rwanda has not been silent in the face of these developments. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs has raised the blockade directly with the mediators, the United States and Qatar, the representatives of the European Union and the African Union. And I have just said that I raised it with individual members of the Council. I raised it with the penny holder, with some presidencies, with the heads of some mechanisms in the region, and nothing happened. Taking into account the factual situation and the wider context of hate ideology in DRC and the inherent legal and moral obligation, allow me to ask the question. Has the Security Council not been aware of this situation? Or did it not? Did this situation not merit your attention? The situation in South Kivu, as we address it, we must consider what was the situation before the recent escalation. As a former investigator myself, there is what we call recreating the scene. From where we sit, we can only tell you the facts. But the Security Council can, among the wide possibilities you have, to recreate this scene. Choose to recreate it. But that is how it will look. All the principles that we have spoken about, sovereignty, territorial integrity, Rwanda is part of that multilateral belief that must be respected. But the existence of FDLR threatens all of that. Yes, facts are stubborn. Resolutions are more stubborn. And in the resolutions, one stubborn fact is that DRC government has, for the past 30 years, supported the FDLR. FDLR does not just threaten the territorial integrity of Rwanda, it threatens the very existence of Rwanda and its people. One of my uncles paid money in 94, so he could be killed by the bullet. Because there was that situation, you either choose to be shot or you die by a machete. One of my uncles paid money to be killed by a bullet. So everyone can make a decision not to care about the situation of Rwanda and the threat we face. All these people that I'm talking on behalf of, because nobody else does, in the situation they face. But do we also ask them to be participants in their own situation, to be part of the plan for their own extermination? Can we go that far? So to conclude, honorable members of, distinguished members of the council, we thank the mediators. We thank them very much. And we thank most profoundly the efforts that are going on by the mediators, particularly the United States, to address the most recent situation. And we are a willing participant to finding a viable solution forward, because we believe if we all commit to implementing in good faith the commitments we made in Washington, and if we support fully the process in Doha, then we possibly have a possibility to have a peaceful solution. The conflict that we have lived with for many, many years. This problem has gone on for too long, and it is our request and our appeal that we should all focus to supporting the present avenues for a peaceful solution. I will not go into what we said in the past. We have been here many times. Why do we have defensive measures and how are they going to be lifted? All those issues are addressed in the agreements, and we shall continue to work with mediators and to make sure that we meet our part of the challenge. Thank you very much.
This is the journey to one Africa.